Hello, my name is Asia Rezan, and this is The Literati, where we go into cultural storytelling, talking about literature, art, music, and everything for the culture. This week, we're going to go into Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God, an analysis of Jamie Mae Starks. Perhaps one of the hardest reads, yet entertaining after the first few chapters, Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God, which was written in 1935, was a novel that, had it been written without its diction, location, intact, would have been similar to Erica Jong's Fear of Flying, which was written in 1973, or any romantic novel found in the Harlequin romance in the mid-70s or 80s, except for one thing. This novel has soul that could not be described or compared to when it came to Black love and the Black experience in the time this was written. Zora Neale Hurston, who was born in 1891 and died in 1960, had been a woman who was not afraid of expression, and through her writings, she was naked and open as she not only rewrote her life, but she also became an unapologetic bohemian who wrote, laughed, and lived within her passions as the queen of the niggerati in the Harlem Renaissance. Her inspiration for such a book was a rewrite of her own life through the passion she felt for Percival Punter, who was a man of an educated mind, and for the two, she was in love with his intellect as well as his handsome image. She saw him as the real love affair of her life. Though she and the man 12 years her junior was smitten with each other, there was competition for each other's attention as well as a passionate anger between the two. Hurston felt this, especially as Punter wanted her to give up her work, leave New York, and become his wife. After a physical fight that went from blows to tears and apologies, Hurston was granted the Guggenheim Fellowship that would help her continue her work in anthropology. At this point, she knew that the fight in her was leaving as she was giving more of herself to him than her work and even to herself. She quickly left Punter for Jamaica and for herself. In the passion of missing Punter and their relationship, along with questioning whether she would have stayed or left, she began to take 7 weeks of her life in Haiti and created a novel that spoke of the same passion that she yearned and desired. She spoke an intimacy that was yearned for, a desire set in space that she once knew as her home, and spoke it with a dialect that was familiar to her. Perhaps she, at the time of her creating the novel, was homesick. Perhaps it was a slight case of jungle fever that took her into the space and inspired her to write. Either way, the character Janie was birthed through her heartache and longing for the very muse that would inspire Tea Cake. In the first reading, as we look upon Janie, we wonder about her story as she walks upon the town in nothing but overalls and her hair down, looking defeated. She was nothing like the women around her. While they sit in whispers and judgment, she became the talk of the moment. The idea of her being taken by this young man. It was only her friend Phoebe who approached her to learn of the adventures of what this dynamic woman had been through. As a dreamy child, she looked for love through nature. She had sought its intimacy, how the flowers interacted, and how they had spun their colors. Her definition of love was cemented in this paragraph. She was stretched on her back beneath the pear tree, soaking in the alto chant of visiting bees, the glow of the sun, and the panting of breath of the breeze when the audible voice of it all came to her. She saw a dust-bearing bee sink into the sanctum of a bloom. The 1,000 sister catalogs arched to meet the love embraced and the ecstatic shiver of the tree from root to tiniest branch, creaming in every blossom and frothing with delight. So this was a marriage. She had been summoned to behold a revelation. Janie had reached womanhood in a way that made her look at everything and everyone differently, including a young man whom she began to crave. Her grandmother, who had seen the changes in this young woman, wanted to make sure she was taken care of, unlike her mother before her. She had married her off to Logan Killicks, an older gentleman who had land as well as protection. To Janie, this was not protection from what the world would do to her, however. This was to keep the peace for her grandmother, as well as to place her in a space where she would have someone to take care of her. However, the readers see that this isn't so. Janie is used as a mule of the world, as her granny had spoken of. She worked, but was seen as nothing but a worker, not as a wife or even as a woman. That protection that was given to Janie was more of an imprisonment where she would pray and yearn to escape from being on this path. Mind you, in Janie's case, this is where she's seen as the heel of a shoe. She was a worker, no better than any animal that would help tend to the farm. Her idea of marriage, as it was seen in the quote earlier, had been replaced with the clay from the ground, the sweat of her brow, and the resentment of this loveless marriage. In comes Joe Starks, a shiny object that caught Janie's eye the moment she met him. Through him, she saw dreams, a man who wanted to build and place her high on a pedestal. As women, we want to be seen as a prize, a jewel people yearn to touch. But to be placed on that pedestal, she had to tell Logan that she could no longer be his wife. He, possibly with his heart broken, tells Janie that she has no reason to look down on him and all that he could do. It made no difference to her. She was a queen who demanded something better than what she was. She would find herself in better surroundings with Joe Starks, who had his mind on power and prestige. What she never understood, however, is that she was no longer the heel of the shoe. She found herself to be the protected toe, a beautiful display that he placed so high on the pedestal that no one was to touch her, see her, or even call her by her first name. She found herself helping to build on a dream that Joe Starks had, not only to have any acknowledgement from the work that she had done. Joe Starks' jealousy and fear of losing her would have her covered from head to toe, right down to the hair on her head that was yearned for by the local men. She no longer associated with the people in a jovial way. She was no longer Janie. She was Mrs. Joe Starks, a shadow of her former self, and he was more than upset that she could never see that. From the book, it says, she wasn't appreciative of his efforts, and she had plenty cause to be. Here he was, just pouring honor all over her, building a high chair for her to sit on and overlook the world as she was pouting over it. Not that he wanted anyone else, but just too many women would be glad to be in her place. He ought to box her jaws. The differences between the two marriages are simple. Before, she was a worker who tilled the fields and was seen as nothing but. Later, the first lady who was seen as better than anyone but nothing more. She was now a possession that Joe Starks had married. What was missing in all this protection from these men was reciprocity, a give and take from both sides, where she would be respected as a woman, a lady, and someone who would help build upon a dream. As quiet as she would be about what she desired from Joe Starks, it would be placed out in public as she would play an impromptu game of dozens with her quietly ailing husband, regaining some part of her soul that was left in the very garden she played in as a child. In the book, it says, his vanity fled like flood. Janie had robbed him of his illusion of irresistible maleness that all men cherish, which was terrible. But Janie had done worse. She had cast down his empty armor before men, and they had laughed, would keep on laughing. When he paraded his possessions hereafter, they would not consider the two together. They'd look with envy at the things and pity the man that owned them. Joe Stark's death and his curse to Janie on his deathbed left her shaken. Yet at the same time, he was not the man that she married. Janie wanted what she had seen in that garden, a passionate virtue that was given and received in such glory. Yet her relationship and reputation with Joe Starks had become nothing more than a glass menagerie, so fragile and void of free air and space. When his curse of death by thunder and lightning was spoken before his passing, Janie spoke her truth to him, making sure he knew before he left this earth that her sorrow came from that sad pedestal that he had placed her on. His death was a new freedom for Janie, however. Though the small town mourned, she had the same feeling as she did in her youth, a sense of freedom to be herself and to define herself again. Tea Cake was a character that embraces the idea of pulling out the Janie that she once was, though he was much younger than she was. She finally saw a part of herself that made so much sense. She saw the familiarity from the moment he walked into town, though she knew the talk would be extensive, and it was, and the look of her running with such a man would seem improper, especially with the fact that she was a widow of the man who founded the town in the first place. Tea Cake is, in all sense to the reader, a questionable sort. Was he after her money? Was he leading her on and attempting to take advantage? Surprisingly and happily, the answer is no. He gave her back herself. Though somewhat irresponsible, he was a man who wanted her to be seen as a lady, but also his lady. When it looked like he had taken her money and ran, it was seen as a man who wanted to be generous and be the man that Janie saw. Janie, I would have given Jacksonville with Tampa for a jump back for you to be there with me. I started to come get you 2-3 times. I was scared, too scared I might lose you. Them wasn't no hide mucky mucks. Them was railroad hands and they women folk. You ain't used to folk like that. I was scared you might get all mad and quit me for taking you amongst them. Though Tea Cake, like the many that were in her town, saw her as a lady on the pedestal, he still saw her as his and as a woman of her own mind. This placed her, in this case, the soul of the shoe. There was comfort, a way to get into the direction that they both yearned to go. They worked together, loved together, and went as far as the Everglades to work with the people without question. Their relationship in this day and time would not be ideal, but in that time frame and with the environment they were in, even if some of it was sometimes barbaric, i.e., when Tea Cake had a loud fight to make sure the community around them knew that Janie was his woman, they found love and reciprocity despite it all. During and after the storm, Tea Cake was her hero. But after the bite from the rabid dog, he refused to let her see him weak. He wanted, even to the death, to give her direction, even at the end of a gun. When we see Janie's character, we wanted to cheer her on and wanted to scold her for letting someone take her passion and her beauty away. Amongst each husband, they took something from her that she held on for dear life. With Logan, her beauty was not a possession, but her work was. Through Logan, she was muscle, another work hand, taking the feminine away. For Joe Starks, she was a jewel untouched, yet covered in a velvet box for no one to desire. With that, Joe Starks took her youth and her natural beauty. As far as Tea Cake goes, she was her youthful self late in her years. Yet he took her heart and the feelings of inadequacy, making her his equal, a reciprocal lover who defined her not so high and untouched, nor beneath and without balance. She was a woman who could be loved and receive love without apology.